is ODAT Chat, your instant connection to recovery and community, one day at a time. This podcast may contain strong language, sexual content, and spiritual truth. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to ODAT Chat. My name is Arlina, and I'll be your host. This is a podcast where my guests and I talk about recovery from addiction. We largely focus on unpacking the issues that cause addiction and how it affects us, but also on solutions, including the 12 steps, some habits, teachers, and ideas that contribute to long-term recovery. There's a lot of mainstream media exposure of alcoholics and addicts of all kinds, really, but it doesn't always come from people who actually experience addiction, and frankly, that bothers me. So I created this platform so that we can tell our own stories of what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now, to bring understanding and, really more importantly, connection and community to those affected by addiction. Today's episode is with Chris, who is currently traveling across the country in his RV called Further. He's documenting his trip by writing on his blog called, what else? BigChrisFurtherer.com. He's providing beautiful image through his photography, and it looks like he's having a great time. I can't wait to hear some of his stories when he gets back. We talked about anonymity, sponsorship, and his moment of clarity. Chris also shares his story of alcoholism, drug addiction, and how he changed it all. I think like 28 or 29 years ago now. It's proof that we can break the cycle of addiction and lead meaningful, productive lives. So I hope you enjoy the podcast with Chris. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you don't miss out on any upcoming episodes. And with that, please enjoy this conversation with Chris. Well, Chris, thank you so much for taking the time to join me on the podcast today.
I'm looking forward to this.
This will be fun. You are on this adventure, and I have to confess I'm super jealous because you put in your time, and now you're retired, and now you're getting to do all kinds of really cool things. So I'm excited to talk to you about your travels. And just right out the gate, what is the name of your blog that you're posting all your adventures on?
BigChrisFurtherer.com.
Furtherer.com. I love that. I'll put a link in the show notes on the website so people can just look it up. But where did that name come from?
There was a book that came out in 1962 called One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and it's about a lot of stuff, but Kesey that wrote it was involved in some experiments with LSD back in the 60s, and he got a bunch of people together around the country in a bus, and they named it Further, and the Further was misspelled. It was Futhur. And when I was buying the motorhome, I was thinking about that for a name for the bus. And so I picked up another copy of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. It had been years since I read it. Uh-huh. And when I was reading it, I was surprised that I was seeing it differently than I did in like 1970 or whenever I read it, because Tom Wolfe was writing the book, and when I read it when I was a kid or younger, it was all about the LSD thing. And as I read it, I kind of got the idea that Kesey was trying to move past the chemicals and moving on to the spiritual thing. And so I just Furtherer popped in my head, and that's what I use.
I love it. That's super funny. Yeah, so you're going to go Furtherer in your RV than they probably got.
Well, yeah, and it's not a drug thing or an alcohol thing. It's a and I don't know how spiritual it is, but I've had some interesting experiences so far, and it seems pretty spiritual to me.
Yeah. Well, I definitely want to dig into some of those experiences that you've had. It sounds like from your blog that I was checking out, which is really cool. You've met some really cool people and had some really, some fun moments, some kind of profound moments. So we'll definitely dig into that. But let's start with some of your background. So you've been sober a long time. How long have you been sober?
I got clean and sober in April 6th, 1988.
April. Okay. Yeah, I got sober in April too. I don't know what it is about that month, but it was like April's a good month. I like that.
Well, it's like Hank Coco used to say, I was tired.
I think
By
tired of
April,
being.
I was tired.
That's right. And what did you do professionally? You just retired.
I was with PG&E, and I was a safety coordinator, safety.
Right.
But I started to burn out there. I was doing investigations on fatalities, and it got to me, and I decided to leave. And I wound up at Stevens Creek Quarry as a safety manager, and I spent 3 years there, and I retired May 5th.
Good for you. Yeah, I didn't realize that that's what you were doing, investigating death. That must have been kind of, I mean, what kind of detail did they get it? Did you have to get into? Did you have to like?
Yeah, it wasn't third party stuff. All of my investigation, I investigated 5 fatalities in 18 months, which is part of the reason why I burned out.
Wow. Like on the job deaths?
Yeah, people that had gotten into the electrical wiring.
Oh God.
Yes, and yes, reports on top of reports on top of reports, because upper management all started wringing their hands when somebody got killed, and then everybody forgot about it later. So.
Oh shoot.
Yeah. So it got to be too much. So,
yeah.
Yeah. I just wanted to get out.
Yeah. Well, good. Yeah, I'm glad you're not doing that anymore. That doesn't sound very pleasant.
Nope, not at all.
No.
It wasn't fun at all.
Not fun at all.
I learned a lot, but yeah.
I bet. Yeah. Yeah. No, that sounds like it would be really challenging, but it sounds like you made the transition well. And what is your current relationship status?
I was instructed by Jerry to fall in love with myself, so I'm working on that.
This is your current relationship is with yourself. You're not married.
Yeah, and I seem to be getting along with me okay, so it's working out pretty good.
That's awesome. Good deal. Where did you grow up?
I grew up right where I'm sitting right now. I'm in Logansport, Indiana right now, and I'm from here. Yeah, I was born at St. Joseph's Hospital, which no longer exists, on the east side of Logansport, Indiana.
Interesting that you kind of went full circle.
Well, I knew I would head back here, on my journey. It just made sense.
Yeah.
But I'm sitting in the driveway of a longtime friend and old drinking partner. His wife of many years just passed away a little over a year ago, Alzheimer's, and
that's rough.
And yeah, so it's good that I'm here, and we're learning a lot about how our lives went and comparing notes and stuff, and it's been very rewarding.
It's amazing. Yeah, that's super cool that you have the ability to do that. Very cool. So you grew up in Indiana. Tell me a little bit about your family. What did your parents do in Indiana?
My dad, towards the end of his life, he died young. He died when he was 47 years old, but he had gotten divorced from my mom, married another woman, and had 2 more kids. My family was 2 boys, 2 girls. My sister Rita and myself are the only ones left out of that group.
Oh, really?
And my sister Rhonda died a couple of years ago. She had some kind of perforated intestinal thing, and she went in the hospital with a stomach ache, and 72 hours later she was dead. So,
well, yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, and then my brother, it's been about 4 years ago now, almost 5. In January, he passed away. It was a heart thing, and then 6 weeks later, my mom died. So,
oh my goodness.
That on top of those investigations I was doing at PG&E, that kind of put me over the top.
Yeah, that's a lot. I mean, did you feel like you were depressed at that point, like going through a lot of depression?
Oh yeah, I was. I couldn't identify it. One of my main character defects that I've identified is self-diagnosis. And
Right.
when I started thinking I know what's wrong with me, I'm in super danger then. So anyway, I was seeing a therapist, and I was blaming, my soon-to-be ex-wife for all of my problems, and
Naturally.
and then yeah, and I really didn't feel like I was getting anywhere with him, and I wasn't talking about the fatalities at work, and I wasn't talking about my my brother or my mom dying. I was trying to focus on the relationship thing.
Yeah.
And at some point, I decided to go see Dr. Jerry, right? And I walked in Dr. Jerry's office and started to talk and totally broke down.
Aww.
And he said, well, look, I want you to fill out some paperwork. And then he walked back in the room, and he had that big toothy grin of his, and he says, "You're depressed." And I said, "Fuck you." But that it started from there, and then he said, "Look, you're part of Kaiser. This is what we're going to do." And I went and saw a psychologist, and then I went and saw a psychiatrist, and I was given some medication. Mm-hmm. I took the medication. Mm-hmm. I think I told you this the other day. I was at a men's meeting maybe 6 months later, and I was starting to feel better, but I told the guys at the men's meeting about this story, and I said, yeah, I was seeing a therapist, and I saw Dr. Jerry, psychologist, psychiatrist. I said, if things get any worse, I'm going to call my sponsor. and I started laughing, and I knew that I was starting to heal, and shortly after that, I kind of, with his permission, I weaned myself off the antidepressants, and right. I feel like I've really gotten a grip on it. But it was, if there's anybody listening to this thing and you think you're going through something and you might be depressed, don't fuck with depression.
Right. Yeah. Go get help.
Get help. Absolutely.
Yeah. And truth be told, when I hear you talk about that stuff, it sounds like you actively processed all those feelings. Like you needed some, and listen, we need help from time to time to process these huge feelings. Like you lost a lot of people. Like you were dealing with a lot of death at that time. And I don't care who you are, especially if you're a sensitive, caring, empathetic person, that will definitely take a toll on you. So just from hearing your story, it sounds like you did the work of processing and resolving a lot of those feelings. Do you think that's a fair statement?
Yeah, I think it's a fair statement, but the interesting part to me is that being involved in recovery all these years. I mean, I've been, in recovery for 29 years. I didn't recognize the fact that I didn't have the tools necessary to get myself out of that. I was clueless.
Isn't that funny? Even after all this time, we don't recognize the position that we're in. I feel like that's happened to me many, many times. Like I just find myself in a situation and I'm like, how did I even get here? What is this?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's been a good thing for me because it kind of sent me to a couple different places in recovery that I really hadn't been before.
Oh, like what?
About 2 or 3 years ago, and I was talking about it a lot at the time, and our anonymous program of 12-step thing. Mm-hmm. I really started to re-examine the second step and the 11th step, and the reason that I really got involved in that was in the second step. It talks about that power greater than myself being able to restore me to sanity. Mm-hmm. And I don't think I'm much different than a lot of other people. When I read that stuff initially, I thought, how am I ever going to return to a place that I've never been? You know what I mean? Yeah. I mean, I don't think I was ever rational or sane. I can't remember times in my life where I felt like I really had my shit together. That's for sure.
Right.
And but in re-examining that, I started thinking about it, and I thought, wow, Chris, that's really bad. You just did that step, and before you got to the period at the end of that sentence, you took it back.
Right.
You just got done saying you're going to give it to God, or you're going to give it to this power to deal with it, and then you're already wrestling it back, telling that power that they can't put you someplace you've never been.
Right.
And so I that was one of the things that it started to get me thinking. So, and then into the 11th step and the prayer and meditation, the same thing. When I pray, if I'm starting to name people and starting to dictate policy for God, I've completely lost track of what I'm supposed to be doing. Right?
I love that, dictating policy for God.
Well, it's and that's that. Pure and simple, that's what it is.
Agreed.
The
Yeah.
second that and so I've spent a lot of time over the last couple of years, and it actually came up in a meeting here in Indiana this morning. I said, look, if my day's not going as planned, if I plan to be a certain place at 1:00, and if at 1:00 I'm someplace entirely different, I start looking around for who it is I'm supposed to be helping.
Mm-hmm. Oh, right. Yeah. You figure you must be there for a reason then.
I'm there for a reason.
Mm.
So figure out what it is. It's like an old George Carlin thing. I remember when I was a kid, the George Carlin album, and he talked about when he was a kid, and they'd go to the airport, and he'd say, there's a spy in here somewhere. Our job, find him. Right? So it's like when I work with people, or when I'm in some place I'm not supposed to be, I start trying to figure out why it is that I'm there.
Oh, yeah. And you have the intention that you're trying to help. So you're coming from that place of, who can I help here?
Well, that's my instructions, right?
Right.
Trust God, clean house, and work with others.
Right. Keep it simple. And you're able to stay focused. Yeah, that's interesting that you're, okay, so this is something I struggle with. I have a plan, like my agenda for the day, and I start my day with that same intention, let me be of service, wherever I am. But sometimes it's tough not to check God at the door and then go off. You know what I mean? It's hard not to do that sometimes. How do you remember?
Well, that's the other thing I think. As time's gone on, it's kind of interesting. Before recovery, it was just like I would run headlong at a wall and throw myself into it, and then I'd back up 30 paces, and then I'd try it again. And in recovery, I've gotten to the place where I'll run, almost up to the wall, and then stop and turn it back over. I mean, I don't have to have the impact all the time to get the message. You know what I mean?
Right. So you just feel like through experience and practice, you're able to, recognize that you don't need to try to break the wall down.
Yeah. And the other thing is that there's, there's other factors, right? So if I want to avoid, like you said, you plan your day. Mm-hmm. So I got to the place where I recognize, for me, and I don't know anybody else, I recognize for me that if I wanted some kind of serenity, one of the most simple things that I could do for more serenity was to leave 15 minutes earlier for whatever for whatever I'm doing. And that takes some, if I get stuck in traffic, then I got a little bit of a cushion. If I get there a little bit early, it's like I was saying before. I went to this meeting the other day. The guy was 21 years old. And I was supposed to be there. I was just supposed to be there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and your energy is totally different when you're not rushing.
Absolutely. Oh my God, are you kidding?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
I'm
I think
a fucking nutbag when I start getting wound up.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's good. That is probably the most spiritual and practical application of serenity, is just leave a little earlier.
Leave a little earlier. you'd be surprised.
Yeah, I mean, and my daddy will tell you that there is no early. You're either on time or you're late. I hate being late. No, that's interesting. Okay, so I want to ask you, because you mentioned, there's two things I want to ask you about. You mentioned steps and a higher power, so I want to kind of break that down. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about anonymity because, you and I are both creating content that's recovery oriented. And I started my podcast because I was hearing a lot of people with influence who could reach a lot of people talk about recovery and alcoholism, addiction, from a place that wasn't of experience, right? Like, okay, I'll just say it. I was listening to Joe Rogan, who has a huge following, huge podcast. He's like one of the most popular podcasts. And him and some other dude were talking about their friend who is an alcoholic, and they just didn't get it. It was like one of those things where, like, if this guy would just stop drinking, it's really weird. This guy would take a couple drinks and he would lose his shit or whatever. Like, they just clearly didn't get it, and they were speculating and pontificating, and I was coming out of my skin. I was like, I really feel like it's so important for us to tell our own stories. I can't stand it when other people are trying to tell our stories. And so for me, that's why I'm not anonymous. That's why I've kind of come out of the closet and just been like, I feel like I want, like, I love your story, which is why I invited you on. Are you feeling something similar? Like we should be telling our own stories?
I'm all about the anonymity principles and stuff. If I was standing in front of a TV camera right now, I would not identify myself as an alcoholic. I would say something about being in an anonymous 12-step program. But everybody that knows me saw the change.
Right.
And everybody that knows me from before knows that I'm a different person. Mm-hmm. So when they ask me what that's about, I'm willing to tell it to them. And we live in such a different world now than it was in 1935. Mm-hmm. There are celebrities that break their anonymity all the time. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying that, and I'm not, I respect the anonymity thing. It's a hell of a lot more complicated than it used to be. It's almost impossible to stay anonymous. So I guess the best thing that you can do is try to live the kind of life where you're not shedding any bad light on the program.
Okay, because I almost feel like I would be more inclined to say that I've recovered from alcoholism than I would to say I'm a member of an anonymous program. You know what I mean? Like I almost.
Yeah.
I mean.
Yeah,
yeah.
And that's exactly right. I mean, you can say it any way you want. It's I think the way not to say it is I'm a member of
Alcoholics Anonymous.
I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm a member of
Right.
I just and it's not it's very thinly veiled. Everybody knows.
I know.
About,
and I feel so sorry for like public figures because they're outed all the time. And so I think listen, I can't speak for anybody, but I would imagine that if Ben Affleck was somebody who was outed as going to rehab. And so he has a choice. It's like, does he speak of his experience so that people get it straight from the source? Or does he just let other people tell his story for him? I just think it's such a difficult position to be in.
Well, you've watched some of them over the years that have really struggled with it because maybe their fame or something like that, and so that's a whole nother layer that makes it even tougher. So, I social media, the things that are popping up now, there's private kind of chat rooms and stuff and program stuff, but like I said, it's pretty thinly veiled. I mean, if I put something on Facebook and it's kind of intended for the people I know in recovery, I mean, there's other people that are going to see it. They know me, so they know what I'm talking about. But
Right.
I don't feel like I'm outing anybody, and I wouldn't mention anybody else's name.
Right. Yeah.
You know, in association with whatever I'm doing.
Yeah.
Unless that was, you know, I mean, I've talked at meetings about you know, my sponsor now, Jerry, but the reason I talk about him is because he's so involved in the medical side of the, you know, the program. I mean, he's,
right.
you know, he was the speaker at the conference year before last, or last year.
Nice.
Yeah. So, yeah, I you know, I struggle with it like everybody else. But mainly I just, you know, I talk about, you know, if anybody asks me, I say, well, I'm in you know, this program, and if you want to know anything about it, I'll be happy to talk to you about it. But, you know,
right.
not going to do it here.
Right.
You know, at your cocktail party.
At your cocktail party. Awkward. Yeah. No, yeah, it's a struggle, and it's a multifaceted sort of situation. So, yeah, I think it's one of those things that you just kind of, you know, you don't want to split hairs over, but you kind of grapple. And I think at the end of the day, what you said about just being a good person and being an example, I think speaks volumes, you know, because at the end of the day, it's about attraction, not promotion, right?
Yeah. You know, people ask you all the time, so what, you know, where'd you get that idea? Or where'd you go? Well, it wasn't me, that's for sure. Because you know, my best efforts got me all the way to a 12-step program. That's what happened to me. You know?
Right.
So,
yeah.
Yeah.
No,
they want to know. I'll tell them.
I'll tell. Yeah, me too. And then the other part, I wanted to go back to, you were talking about your higher power, and I feel like everyone has such a unique perspective on how they think of their higher power. So I would love to hear your thoughts on either how you came to acknowledge there's a higher power, or what is your definition of a higher power and how did you get there?
Well, it changes almost daily. And well, it's true. And the reason it changes almost daily is because I keep throwing my opinion out and just kind of listening for inspiration and stuff. I read a lot of, you know, there's Emmett Fox. There was a New Age guy named Ernest Holmes. There was there's all kind of folks that have written a lot of wonderful stuff. But I liked Emmett Fox's approach, and I liked Chuck Chamberlain's approach.
Yeah, new pair of glasses.
Yes, and the reason is because the ones that really interest me aren't really trying to sell me like a package deal. It's not like this is what God looks like, and this is what you need to believe. The guys that I like to read and the people that I like to listen to talk about their higher power, their spiritual nature. It's all about, for me, it's all about not really being able to define that. I'm suspect of anybody that has a very rigid view of what God is, because how the fuck do you know? You know? I mean, that's
right?
What Emmett Fox said. He said, you know, to understand God is to be God. And the one thing I am very clear on, I'm not God. And so I don't spend a lot of time trying to figure that out, but I do listen. I listen to, you know, I listen to other people. I listen to my heart. I try to be receptive in meditation. But I don't spend a lot of time trying to define God. I just think that is just a terrible waste of time.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I love that you said, though, I listen to my heart. You know, that's where the intuition comes from.
Yeah, that's, you know, and they gave me that in the, you know, in the book. I'll have those intuitive thoughts. I will recognize. There will be times when there's no reason why that I should have any kind of an answer for the issue that I'm dealing with, and it just pops in my head.
And it just comes.
And that's, it's organic. It's just there. So I don't need to spend the rest of my life trying to figure out why it was just there.
Right.
I just have to trust that process.
Right. Stay present and acknowledge it when you get it.
Stay in the now.
Stay in the now. Oh, I love that. That's really good. I feel like I never know where these conversations are going to go, but I love that. But I did want to sort of take a step back because I kind of skipped over the whole, like how you got to be, afflicted or whatever with alcoholism or drug addiction. Can we go back a little bit? You are like one of the great storytellers in the rooms, and I love hearing your stories. And you have told some. You have like a couple of really amazing stories, but I wonder if you could sort of just talk a little bit about, and you have as much time or as little time as you want to talk a little bit about your story. Like what happened to you? Like where did this all begin for you? And like maybe like a moment of clarity and what things are like now.
Well, all right. I got as much time as I want.
Yeah. I mean, we could just start with you told me, I remember hearing you talk about like when you were a kid and your parents dropped you off at church and.
Yeah, well, it was my mom, right?
Your mom.
And so Logansport, Indiana is a very religious town. It's called the City of Churches.
Oh.
There's a church on every corner. There's more churches in Logansport than there is Starbucks in San Jose.
That's impressive.
So
that's saying
anyway,
something.
my mom was Catholic and she was married to my dad. My dad was Protestant, and that was unheard of in the 50s.
Wow.
That's just like whack in the 50s. You just don't do that. And so my mom probably feared that she would be struck by lightning if she walked in the church with me. So she used to drop me off at the front of the Broadway Alliance Church on Broadway in Logansport, Indiana. And Chris would walk in the front door and out the back door and go do what I wanted to do. And that's what I did from about the time I was 14 until I was 17. And then I went off the rails. 16, 17, I was, my mom and dad had been divorced since I was about 9. My grandparents were living at the house. I did any goddamn thing I wanted to do. That's who I became.
Right.
And so by the time I was 17 years old, I decided that, I was going to live this life, right? And this friend of mine told me he knew the safe combination out at this country club where my mom worked. And I decided to rob that place one night, and I stole booze. And then I tried to get in that safe, and that wasn't the combination. The guy was bullshitting me. Anyway, I hid the booze cleverly under a tree in front of my house, and some sheriff was driving by and saw it, and they arrested me. And so I wound up in front of a judge in Logansport that I had been in front of before already, and he gave me a choice. He said that I could do some time, or I could go in the military, and that was a popular thing to do with young men in the late 60s. Give you a choice like that. And so, you've heard my story. I was sick and tired of people telling me what to do, so I joined the United States Marine Corps. I'm a genius, did I tell you? Yeah.
Hilarious. I bet they loved you too, because were you by the time you joined this, were you as tall then as you are now?
Actually, that's an interesting part of the story too. I was 6'4" at 17 years old.
Oof.
And I grew 3 inches in boot camp.
Are you serious?
I'm serious. And I'm not sure if it was just a growth spurt or it was from being kicked in the ass.
That must have been shocking.
Yeah.
Wow.
I grew like crazy in there. And anyway, so 17 years old, I'm
Okay.
in Marine Corps boot camp, and I got the hell beat out of me all the time. And so you know, I got out of the training, and then I was stationed in Southern California, and I was in a engineering outfit, and it was a bridge company. And in the winter of '68, it rained for 14 days straight in Southern California, and it washed out all the bridges on Camp Pendleton.
Wow.
And I spent the rest of my time in the Marine Corps rebuilding approaches to those bridges, and that's what I did. So I was in Southern California in 1968, and guess what? There was a lot of other stuff going on.
Yeah, there was.
So I started taking LSD and psilocybin and mescaline and reds and whites and and drinking, and I did it all. I was a garbage can, and so I got out of the. It was a 2-year enlistment, so I got out. I was still only 19 years old. I'd been kicked out of high school. So I went back to Indiana, and I went back to school for a little bit. I took the GED, and just, you know, I was just spinning my wheels. I was working in some stupid ass factory, and it was just, you know, I was going off the rails again. I was just, it was crazy. So, yeah, and that's part of my story too. I got thrown in jail almost as soon as I got back to Logansport. I got arrested for public drunkenness or something, and got thrown in jail. And you know, when I talk, I tell people that's the first time that I ever felt what is described in the big book Alcoholics Anonymous as pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization, because I rolled over on my bunk and there was my name where I'd carved it 2 years before.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. So anyway, I just, you know, there's a speaker that talks about, you know, some people call it doing a geographic. He said where he's from, it's called flight to avoid prosecution. That's pretty much my story. I had to get out of here, and or I was just gonna burn up. I knew it, and so I moved out to California. An ex-sergeant of mine was living there, and I moved in there with him and his wife and 2 kids, and then I went full on into the whole kind of post-hippie thing, and drank and used, and you know, I married my first wife, and you know, 3.5 years with me, and she had to get out, and married my second wife, and 3.5 years with me, and she had to get out, and so I'm rolling into the 80s now, and when my first daughter was born, Nikki, I sensed that I might be at the beginning of the end at that time, but it was a very faint feeling. It was just like, you know, I can't keep doing this, but I kept doing it, and then that, you know, I started doing the Peruvian marching powder, and,
Yes.
and then I really started to go off the rails. And I was already working for PG&E at that time, and hell, I had close to 13 years with PG&E, and I was just getting close to getting fired, and so I got a letter in the mail. I've told this 1,000 times too, but I got this letter in the mail, and it said, you know, what do you want to do with your stock now that you've been terminated? And I hadn't been fired yet, and I considered that a really bad sign, right?
Right.
So I had heard somewhere that if you call the employee assistance representative before you get fired, they have to keep you for 30 more days. And so, you know, like I tell it all the time, I'd love to tell you that, you know, I was walking by the meeting and heard you guys doing the Lord's Prayer and thought, you know, recovery, that's for me. But that's not how it happened. How it happened for me was I thought I was going to lose my job. That's the only thing I had left. And I made the call. And I called the employee assistance representative, and I said, you know, And I told him what all my problems were. You know, my first ex-wife, my second ex-wife, my kids, my job, my foreman. You know, I have magic alcoholic sonar. And, you know, I beam it out. Whatever it hits, that's my problem.
Yeah.
And so he said, well, do you drink or use? And I said, I drink, but I don't use, which was a lie.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, well, why don't you quit drinking? So I quit drinking. And within about 60 days, I was completely out of my mind on the other stuff. And, you know, again, I've told it 1,000 times, but I got to that place where you get up at 3:30 in the morning and walk across the street to make sure those tree police aren't really there. and I was just that nuts, and I knew how to fix it. I was going to start drinking again. So I had a girlfriend at that time. I loaded up the trunk of the car, and I said, come on, we're going to Monterey. And went down to Monterey, and I started drinking again, and I learned again what it says in the book. You know, the progression of the disease. I'm going to get right back to where I was. And I did exactly that. I was right back there. So I made the second call to the employee assistance guy, and he said, what's going on? And I said, I think I have a problem with drugs and alcohol. And that's the first honest thing that had come out of my mouth in probably 25 years.
Wow.
It was the first, and I knew it when I said it. It was as clear as a bell. It was just like, you know, everything, you know, the earth stood still. I was go, wow, what did I just say? It was almost that profound. And I knew right then. So they put me, you know, in this program, and I signed an agreement that I wasn't going to use anything for a year. And about 11 months into it, I had the thought that, wow, you know, as soon as this year's up, I can start drinking again. And that's when I really knew, at that point right there, that's when I knew I was an alcoholic for sure. I mean, I had 11 months sobriety at that time, but that's when I knew for sure.
Wow.
And because I was just to figure out a way where I could drink again. And you know, the rest has been, you know, that was April 6, 1988. And, you know, it's been quite a ride. It's been amazing, really, you know.
Yeah. So when you had that moment where you knew for sure, was that your moment of like admitting to, like, you know, the book talks about admitting to your innermost self that you're an alcoholic. It sounds like that was your moment.
That was my moment. And I, you know, and to me, one of the interesting things about, you know, those kind of moments is with each passing year or each time that I work with somebody else or something like that, I get a little bit different perspective on that.
Yeah.
I mean, that the event was profound enough to kind of change my whole life, but at the same time, I wasn't even seeing it as clearly as I'm seeing it now. And, you know, maybe 30 years down the road, I'll be seeing it even more clearly. But to me, that's kind of the interesting part of this.
As time goes on, you get more clarity.
Yeah.
And working through others. That's amazing.
Yeah. Look at that realization today where you know, I'm telling these other guys, I mean, it's something that I've been doing intuitively, but I never put it into words before today, I don't think, until, you know, I said to those guys, I don't get pissed off that I'm not where I'm supposed to be at 1:00. I'm where I'm supposed to be.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's you know, I didn't really put it into words before today, but you know, I've been feeling that for a while.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. It's interesting, just as you stay sober and you work with others, and it's just interesting the lessons that that keep coming up. And sometimes that you just get it at a deeper level and then it just sticks with you even that much more. And I think for me, like working with others has been a huge part of being able to, recover from my disease. And listen, you've worked with a lot of people. You really do have that light that shines within that people are attracted to. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about how you sponsor people. I know can you just share your thoughts on, how you sponsor and maybe how you address the steps?
I had a sponsor, my third sponsor, and I asked him to work with me, and he said something that I've never forgotten since. And I think I've said it to just about everybody I've ever sponsored. He said, Chris, the only thing I can give you is the 12 steps of the program. Everything else is pride and ego. Mm. And I've tried to kind of stick with that. And the guys that know me, they know I don't offer a lot of advice. I noticed, this is just something I noticed. I don't know if anybody else has, but when I offer advice to people, I usually get the opportunity to use it in about 48 hours. So I try to avoid advice at all costs.
That is so funny that you say that, because I will often assign homework to a sponsee and I just give it up smooth. I don't even pretend, like I just do the assignment right along with them. It's so funny. Yeah. But advice works the same way, right? You got to take your own advice.
You better, because you're gonna get, well, here's what you should do. I just set the bear trap. I'm gonna walk right into that son of a gun. So yeah, I avoid that, and John's, his words ring true. That's the only thing I have. And we talked about it earlier, right? You asked me about my story. Ultimately, that's all I've got.
Yeah.
I don't have any great advice on, it's like the whole higher power thing. I don't look at how much more spiritually enlightened I am. I look at how much less dense I am. Right?
Yeah.
I don't know how close I am to God, but I know I'm not as far away as I used to be.
Right. You're not in the middle of the darkness.
Yeah. So I'm just struggling to the surface, and like everybody else. And we're all in it together. There are people coming in with 2 weeks that know infinitely more about a subject than I do, because they've had to live through it or something. So mm-hmm. I can show them the tools that I used to get me to the place where I can deal with stuff. Mm-hmm. And I can show them the tools that were taught to me to, and that involves, I got a couple of the guys that I've worked with over the years working with other guys right now. I kind of left them in the lurch. I mean, I didn't leave them in the lurch, but I'm traveling around the country, so it's not like, it's not as convenient, right? It's not eyeball to eyeball.
Right.
So they're working with these other guys. I would no more stand in the way of that than that's such a wonderful thing, because they can get a different perspective and they can grow in their recovery.
Yeah.
And why would I get hung up about that? So, I just, sponsorships, just all I can do is share my experience, strength, and hope. And I try to do that. And if it's not, I sponsored guys, and after a long period of sobriety and stuff, they come back and they go, my life's kind of going sideways again. And I tell them, well, hey, go down to detox, and they don't want to hear that. They want me to tell them something that's going to get them back on track. I don't know anything that's going to get you back. I know what I did to stay sober. I know what I did to stay focused on what I want to do, and it involves helping other people and doing the work that the program outlined for me. And if I do that stuff, then I stay on track. And if I don't do that stuff, I'm off track.
Yeah. No, I love that. The book talks about nothing ensures sobriety like intense work with another alcoholic.
Yeah, and they're doing me a favor when
I know.
I feel blessed, man. I'm it's like that kid walking in the meeting the other day. Or like my first 12-step call. The guy bends over to tie his tennis shoe, and we're going to take him to detox, and he says, "What's the first thing we have to do?" And I go, "The first thing we have to do is admit we're powerless over alcohol and that our lives have become unmanageable." And I thought, who the fuck said that? That was me. It came out of my mouth. And again, it's that intuitive thought and keeping my racing brain out of the mix and just try to do what I've been taught to do.
Yeah. And do you feel like, so here's something I wrestle with is, I like that you said that you don't give advice. But I struggle with, sometimes I feel like I accidentally do therapy or something because I feel like I will share, it feels kind of like my experience, strength, and hope. But somebody will come to me with a situation, something that I'm very familiar with, and it's tempting. Like, I don't tell people what to do, but I kind of am, because I'll be like, oh, well, this is what I did. You know what I mean? Is that giving advice or no?
No, that's not giving advice at all. That's following the instructions. You can tell somebody what you did, and guess what? If you're, to me, what you're trying to do at that point is you're trying to get them to think for themselves. So they can go answer shopping. They can go talk to 50 people and get 50 different plans for doing but ultimately, somewhere down the road, they need to make a choice about what they're going to do.
Right.
As long as I'm not making that choice for them, one of my friends wrote something about this the other day, about the choice. The choice is the thing.
Yes.
You can, when you say this is what I did in that situation, that was the thing that hooked me in. You could go to any back room in any club in the country, and you got 2 or 3 people that are experts on every damn thing.
Right.
But what I always listen for is the guy that says, this is what I did in that situation. Then you're getting some real advice. You're getting some real input. Everything else is smoke and mirrors.
Yeah, smoke and mirrors. This is what I did. Yeah. I think we do inspire people through action. It's not what we say, it's what we do.
Well, I'm a firm believer that if you're thinking that your recovery's not good enough or that you're not doing enough, that you should head on down to detox and get the smell of Lysol and vomit in your nostrils and remember what it was like.
Yeah, no kidding.
And and that's and Al used to talk about this. Al was my sponsor, and he'd talk about osmosis. Now you can sit in the meetings all day long, and you can get enough information, and you can feel good enough about yourself that it's going to change your life. It will literally change your life. But that's not good enough for me. I've always wanted that little sentence in there about being rocketed into a 4th dimension. I'm all about the high.
Yep.
That's the high.
Yeah.
That's the high. When I did the work, and when I got the results, I got the 4th dimension.
Yep. I always say that the secret high is around the 4th and 5th step. Like when I dropped my first 5th step with somebody, I walked out of this girl's house high. Like I had dropped the rock, the bag, and I felt free for the first time since I was a child. And I felt like spiritually high.
It's a profound effect.
Yeah.
The problem that you find as time goes on, or I've found as time goes on, is somehow I don't recognize what a profound thing that was a little bit down the road, and I become unwilling to do the work that got me there in the first place.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah, it's all of a sudden I don't want to do an inventory. I already did one.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? The fact that I'm sitting there thinking about it means I probably ought to be doing another one.
Yeah. Rebellion dogs are every step, right?
Absolutely.
Such rebellious creatures. Here's the funny thing I've been thinking about lately is somebody was expressing frustration with themselves because they were wrestling with the same issue again. And what I heard from somebody, and I totally believe this to my core, it's probably my sponsor, but we are different every time we step up to the plate to address something. Because each time we step up to the plate and we do the work, we learn something and it changes us. So therefore, by definition, the next time it comes around, we get something different out of it because we're different, right? It's like that peeling of the onion thing. We're different. We're different every time. And so I don't feel bad anymore that, like now I don't feel bad. Like when I come up, like I have my cross to bear, I wrestle with the same things all the time. And, but I'm making progress because I'm different every time I step up to the plate. It is tough to submit to that process, but like you said, it's all about doing the work.
Yeah, I'm going to mix the hell out of my metaphors right here, but it's the real barometer of my recovery. It was like when I was talking about before, where I'm running at the wall and I'm trying to break through it. So how many times do I have to run and hit that thing before I decide to try something different, right? And so, it's that process. I mean, life's going to throw me the same thing, over and over again until I kind of resolve it or figure out how long I want to spend on it, right?
Right.
It's not like a brand new thing every time.
Mm-hmm.
It's a recurring thing. So what are the tools that I'm going to use to get past that this time? And what tools didn't work last time? Right? So I can if I'm paying attention, I can actually kind of cut my time on the getting through whatever that process is.
Right.
But I used to tell guys, you remember this cartoon from years ago? It was Ziggy. There was a big-headed little creature, and So I always tell them it's like a Ziggy cartoon. You've got this off ramp, and then you've got this other lane, and one lane says God's way, and one lane says my way. So I get on that my way one because that's where I want to go because it's me, right? And it's this big loop, and I come right back, and I'm looking at the same fucking signs. God's way, my way. So I'll take that my way thing about 4 or 5 times, and then finally I'll go, I'm in enough pain or I'm frustrated enough or whatever the case may be that I'm going to try this other thing.
Mm-hmm.
And as painful as it might be initially or as hard as it might be initially, I wind up finding out that was the easier way after all.
Right. Yeah. And I like that we get as many chances as we need to learn the lesson.
On some of this stuff.
On some of it, yeah.
Yeah. There's a whole Darwin factor there, too.
The Darwin factor.
Some of that shit will kill you.
Some of it will, yeah. Yeah, I remember a long time ago I think maybe it was right when I first got sober, but there was this list of rules for being human. And one was that there were no failures, there were only lessons, and that a lesson is repeated until it's learned. And we know that we've learned the lesson by a change in behavior. And, I love your running into the wall metaphor because after a while you just quit doing it, and that's how, you learned. You decided to do something different. And I just think it's so funny that oftentimes I just don't know what else to do, right? And so that's why I lean on my support system or a sponsor because they have other ideas. They can see, it's like they have a clearer perspective or something because they're not, our emotions color our perspective. And so we go to somebody else who has a clearer perspective and So funny. It just seems like, well, duh, I should have known. It seems so obvious once you finally get it, but
Well,
hopefully.
and then you get it, and you work through it, and then you wind up in a similar situation, and it's almost like you're starting over again, because I don't know, I just have an amazing forgetter. I
Yeah.
forget the work that I did to get through whatever that was, and boom, I'm back there again. So yeah, but I'm getting better, right? I mean, it's progress, not perfection, and I keep working at it.
Yeah, I
I
love
like
that.
what you said right there. I like I was talking about the New Age guys. That Ernest Holmes guy said a thing. He said there's no sin, only spiritual mistakes.
Hmm.
And he said there is no retribution, only consequence. And I
Consequence
think
now.
that's pretty amazing shit right there.
I love
There
that
is
because
no
it's
sin, no mistakes. There is no retribution, only consequence.
only consequences. Oh, I love that. We can always change our consequences, right? We get to causes and conditions, and it's cause and effect. It's
That's it.
nothing. It's nothing personal.
Yep. Yeah.
Laws. I love that. Well, we're coming up. Actually, we're coming up on our time here, and I usually like to wrap up. Listen, I could talk to you forever, so maybe we'll have to do a part two because I want to hear about all your stories about that you're getting on the road. But and I guess we could always go to your blog for that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I
But
would encourage anybody that wants
yeah.
to check out what I'm doing. I'm having fun.
Yes, we'll add because you're a great storyteller and your stories really do translate through the written word. So I would highly encourage people to check those out. Great stories. But I do like to end the podcast with what you do on a daily basis. The podcast is ODAT, one day at a time. So do you have either a daily process or a weekly process that you have to help you to stay sober one day at a time?
I would love to tell you that I am rigorous about my prayer and meditation. I'm not. I would love to tell you that I've taken all the advice that I've gotten over the years about, staying in touch with people and stuff like that, and I haven't. I I guess I'm kind of the opposite of that. I truly do it one day at a time, and
Mm-hmm.
it looks different every day.
Yeah.
And I if anybody's feeling like they're not doing recovery right because they don't have some kind of regiment that they're into. I've managed to stay sober a long time, and I really don't have a regiment.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I try to, I talk about it all the time, but we got 12 steps, we got 12 traditions, we got 12 concepts, we got 12s coming out of our ass, but it boils down to those three basic things:
Mm-hmm.
trust God, clean the house, and work with others. And I've found that that's the formula for me. So I try to do that every day. Some days I do, some days I don't.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And you know what? Through everything that you've been talking about, like I feel your intention every day is towards helping other people. And I think that's what I've been hearing, like the overarching message of your whole story was, being helpful to others, being of service.
Well, that's another one where I would love to, claim that that's because of how virtuous I am. But Bill wrote a thing one time that said, "We're not bound by our common virtue. We're bound by our character defects and our strivings to overcome them." And
Bound
that
by, oh, can you say that again? Bound by character defects?
we are bound by our character defects and our strivings to overcome them. That's the thing. That's what holds us together.
Oh my
Our
God. I think I
character
just came
defects.
up with the title of your podcast.
Oh yeah,
That's good, right?
character defects.
We're bound by our character defects. That's some
Well, we
sticky
are.
shit right there.
That's the cement that holds us together.
That's right. Oh, well, that's
Yeah.
great. I love that. So listen, when you get back, keep writing, and when you get back, we'll do round 2, and we'll go over the stories. You mentioned this guy that this 22-year-old. I would love to hear the story about that. So I'll look for your writings on your blog, and we'll do round 2 in a couple months when you come back. How about that?
Sounds like fun.
Great. Chris, thank you so much for joining me today. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we'll talk soon. Thanks.
All right.
Okay, bye-bye.